walking through life. I have changed this. Initially, the poem was about a man, but we are now and I am all for women. A woman is walking through life, determined and focused. Or is she standing, rooted to the spot? Or is she dreaming? Whatever she is doing, she always has the potential to be different. By changing her mind, she can change her state. And that is where the Justina Mutale Foundation comes from, is to change the mind and the state of young African women so they can excel in the 21st century. So when the woman captures and holds her potential, she is still. When she releases her potential, she is free to move and her mind is free to think. And with each choice that she makes, she releases one of her potential selves, in which each one of us, we have several potential selves. And this self becomes real. It separates and gains its own potential in an everlasting cycle. Some of you would know how many titles I hold, how many boards I sit on. So each time I have to go through all this cycle and be someone different at different occasions. And at our foundation, we recognize that Africa is at a new transition in its development, and that Africa needs a new type of leadership in the political, economic, social, and all other sectors of life. Indeed, Africa is rising, and at the center of this growing continent, women are ready to make a difference. Women need to be recognized. And I believe closing the gender gap would ensure sustainable growth for the African continent. However, according to the OECD, the social dimension of sustainable development and its emphasis on equity and equality is the most politically sensitive of the three dimensions of sustainable development. And thus, it is the hardest to address because it involves confronting negative social attitudes such as growing income disparities, rising unemployment, and a persistent gender gap. And our focus is on that persistent gender gap. As stated by former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, no development tool is more effective than the education of girls and the empowerment of women. And it can be argued, or we may all realize that it is no secret that in the 21st century, the advancement of any society hinges on the scholastic advancement of its youth. And with Africa's population poised to double to 2 billion in the next generation, it is clear that the continent's future lies in the hands of the youth, and more so in its young women. Africa has the potential to be a major player in world affairs, but Africa cannot do this without women making their full contribution. The gender equality and women's empowerment strategy for Africa must be premised on women as key and indispensable actors and leaders in accelerating economic growth and in achieving politically, socially, and environmentally sustainable development. We now live in a globalized world, a world in which globalization is meant to expose the whole of humanity to the same cultural, political, economic, and technological experiences and advancements. However, even in the 21st century, the process of globalization still remains uneven. Our foundation is offering young African women a unique opportunity to acquire higher education at renowned institutions of higher learning across the globe. This idea is not only a passage to a career, but it is an enrichment of the mind. Having lived in the diaspora, I still remain a very proud African. And I still believe in the potential of Africa. That's why I'm launching this initiative. Living in the diaspora, I have identified firsthand the benefits of global exposure. I therefore believe that the knowledge, information, wisdom that our scholarship recipients will gain by studying abroad will enhance their capability to become global citizens in a world that is increasingly integrated and yet disintegrated in another way. In his foreword for the 1998 World Education Report, Federico Meyer, then Director General of UNESCO, famously said, "The world we leave to our children depends on the children we leave to the world." And that the hopes for the future rest with today's young people and their readiness to take up the challenges of the 21st century. I am a mother of a millennium baby who was born at the beginning of the century when the Millennium Development Goals were instituted. And I was surprised to find myself in 2015 at the conclusion of the Millennium Development Goals, marching at Times Square in New York in a historical march for gender equality and women's rights. And in 2030, at the conclusion of the Sustainable Development Goals, my daughter, together with all the young women and men born at the beginning of the century, will be the adults. They will be the guardians of the world. They will be the policymakers. They will be the decision makers. I shudder to think that if not adequately equipped, our millennium babies will once again find themselves marching for gender equality and women's rights in 2030 or even 2063. My hope and prayer is that should our millennium babies find the need to march, that they would use smart power and march with their minds and not with their feet, as we have been doing. That they will march with a mind fully equipped with the necessary skills, education, information, knowledge, and power networks to enable them to participate on equal footing with their male counterparts. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude here by leaving you with these questions. What are Africa's hopes for the next 50 years and the next 100 years and beyond? What are our hopes for realizing the global goals for sustainable development? And indeed, what are Africa's hopes for realizing our very own ambitious Agenda 2063? If we cannot adequately educate and prepare our youth to face the world from a global perspective, and if we cannot adequately prepare the other half of the African population, who are the women, to participate on equal footing, what indeed are our hopes, if any, of achieving the 50-50 planet that we are hoping for by the year 2030, if we do not equip our young women accordingly? It has been said that a society that operates on half its manpower, half its human resources, and half its potential is one that is bound to fail. As stated by the great Chinese philosopher Confucius, if you plan for a year, for 1 year, plant some rice, just feed yourself hand to mouth. If you plan for 10 years, you can plant trees to sustain the environment. However, if you plan for 100 years, educate the children. Thank you.